Hello all and welcome to Edge Essentials. If you are stuck on the text A Streetcar Named Desire, this session is perfect for you. Whether you're an A-level literature student or literature and language combined, this is going to help you massively. So the agenda during this session is as follows: overview, context, plot, themes and motifs, character analysis, and finally, dramatic methods. Before we start, please connect with us. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on TikTok and X, and browse our Amazon products as well. We do have A Streetcar Named Desire English Revision Guide, which is available as a digital product in the link below, and also on our Amazon storefront. So let's get started. We're going to start with the overview. This play was written by Tennessee Williams, first performed in 1947. It explores power, gender, social class, and mental decline through a clash of cultures and identities. It's set in New Orleans, a vibrant yet unforgiving world where past and present collide. Blanche Dubois, a fragile Southern belle, visits her sister Stella and her working-class husband Stanley. The tension between them spirals into destruction. So we think about the significance of the title. Blanche literally takes a streetcar named Desire to reach her sister's home, but symbolically, Desire drives all the characters' choices, leading to their downfall. Now let's explore some context. So in terms of Williams's life, he struggled with mental illness, sexuality and family trauma. His sister Rose was institutionalized, mirrored in Blanche's mental instability. When looking at post-war America and the decline of the Old South, Blanche represents the dying aristocracy, clinging to the Southern ideals of class and gentility. Stanley represents working-class modern America, driven by power and raw emotion. When looking at gender and patriarchy, women were expected to be submissive. Financial dependence forced them into marriage. Blanche's downfall shows what happens to women who challenge this structure. And in terms of New Orleans and multiculturalism, the setting is diverse and vibrant, embracing change, unlike Blanche, who lives in the past. So now we're going to go through the plot overview. There are 11 scenes and I'm going to go through the key events. So scene 1, Blanche's arrival. Blanche arrives in New Orleans, shocked by the cramped conditions of Stella's home in Elysian Fields. She immediately lies about her drinking habits and conceals her nerves, setting up her pattern of deception. Her first encounter with Stanley hints at underlying tension as he is unimpressed by her airs and graces. Scene 2, Stanley's suspicion. Stanley questions Blanche's past after learning Belle Reve, their ancestral home, was lost. Blanche flirts with Stanley to manipulate him, but he remains distrustful and aggressive. He grabs her love letters from her dead husband and Blanche reacts emotionally, revealing the deep trauma of her past. Scene 3, the poker night. Stanley and his friends play poker, showcasing male dominance and working-class camaraderie. Blanche and Mitch interact for the first time. She charms him, seeing him as a possible escape from her problems. The scene ends violently. Stanley hits Stella in a drunken rage, but she forgives him and stays, shocking Blanche. Scene 4, Stella's loyalty to Stanley. Blanche urges Stella to leave Stanley, horrified by his violence. Stella defends her husband, saying she is physically drawn to him despite his cruelty. Stanley overhears Blanche calling him an ape-like brute, planting the seed for his revenge against her. Scene 5, Blanche's fragility and desire. Blanche panics when she receives a letter from an old flame suggesting her insecurities about aging and desirability. She flirts with a young newspaper boy, exposing her dangerous attraction to youth. Mitch arrives for their date and she puts on a performance of innocence, trying to secure a future with him. Scene 6. Blanche and Mitch's date. Blanche and Mitch have an awkward date where she desperately tries to maintain her illusion of youth and refinement. She finally confesses about her young husband's suicide, revealing her emotional scars. Mitch, touched by her vulnerability, holds her, offering comfort, seemingly accepting her past. Scene 7. Stanley exposes Blanche. Stanley tells Stella about Blanche's past in Laurel, exposing her history of promiscuity and her expulsion from school for an affair with a student. Stella is reluctant to believe him, but is visibly shaken by the details. Blanche, unaware of the conversation, sings in the bathroom, symbolizing her detachment from reality. Scene 8. The birthday dinner disaster. Mitch doesn't show up for Blanche's birthday dinner, confirming he has discovered the truth about her past. Stanley cruelly gives Blanche a bus ticket back to Laurel, shattering her hopes of a fresh start. Stella, disgusted by Stanley's cruelty, goes into labor, leaving Blanche alone and vulnerable. Scene 9. Blanche and Mitch's confrontation. Mitch arrives drunk, furious about Blanche's lies about her past. Blanche tries to defend herself, but Mitch tells her, "You're not clean enough to bring home to my mother." When Mitch tries to force himself on her, Blanche fights back, showing her final attempt to maintain dignity. Scene 10. Stanley's final attack. Blanche, now completely unraveling, dresses in a fantasy world, believing a millionaire will rescue her. Stanley, drunk and aggressive, destroys her illusions, mocking her descent into madness. The scene ends with Stanley sexually assaulting Blanche, asserting his ultimate dominance and sealing her fate. Scene 11. Blanche's departure. Weeks later, Blanche is mentally broken and has been living in a delusional state. Stella chooses to stay with Stanley, refusing to believe Blanche's claims about the sexual assault. A doctor and nurse arrive to take Blanche away, as she utters her final tragic line, "I have always depended on the kindness of strangers." So let's look at key themes and motifs. We have fantasy and reality. Blanche creates illusions to protect herself from reality. Stanley represents brutal truth, tearing Blanche's world apart. She says, "I don't want realism, I want magic." Then we have masculinity and power. Stanley dominates through physical aggression and control. Poker game scenes symbolize male power. He says every man is a king. Then we have femininity and dependence. Blanche and Stella both rely on men. Different approaches. Stella submits to Stanley while Blanche tries and fails to resist. Stella says, "When he's away for a week, I nearly go wild." Then we have the American dream versus the Old South. Blanche represents the decay of the South, reliant on wealth and status. Stanley represents modern immigrant America built on labor and survival. He says, "You come in here with your fancy airs and your hoity-toity speech." Then we have madness and trauma. Blanche's mental decline stems from guilt, grief, and societal rejection. Her husband's suicide left her broken. She says the opposite of death is desire. Our next one is lightness and darkness, and this is a motif. Blanche avoids bright light, symbolizing truth. She covers the lamp with a paper lantern to soften reality. She says, "I can't stand a naked light bulb." And finally, music and sound effects. The Varsuviana polka plays when Blanche remembers her husband's suicide. The train noises are used to show Stanley's presence overpowering Blanche. Now we're going to move on to character analysis. We'll start with Blanche Dubois. So she's a symbol of decay, illusion, and fragile femininity. She represents the decline of the old South, clinging to outdated ideals of class and gentility. She embodies a woman out of place and time, desperately trying to maintain a facade of aristocratic grace in a world that has moved on. Her name, meaning white woods, suggests purity, but her actions reveal a woman hiding secrets and moral ambiguity. She frequently refers to herself as a Southern belle, but her reality is far removed from the privilege she once had. She escapes into fantasy but is destroyed by reality. She fabricates stories about her past, relationships, and age to construct a false identity. She wears faded but elegant clothes to maintain her illusion. Her fixation on dim lighting, for example covering up the light bulb with a paper lantern, symbolizes her desire to conceal the harsh truths about herself. However, reality, embodied by Stanley, systematically tears down her illusions, culminating her complete psychological collapse. So some quotes for Blanche is, "I've always depended on the kindness of strangers," as that suggests both her reliance on men and how she is ultimately abandoned by society. And also, "I don't tell the truth, I tell what ought to be the truth," and this highlights her self-deception and belief that fantasy is more bearable than reality. Then we have Stanley Kowalski. He represents brute force, masculinity and dominance, a product of modern industrial America. Stanley is a working-class immigrant who prides himself on honesty, power and control. He rejects Blanche's superiority complex, resenting her air of entitlement and seeing her as a manipulator. His animalistic physicality, described as an ape by Blanche, contrasts sharply with her delicate performative femininity. He's obsessed with exposing Blanche and maintaining control. He systematically investigates Blanche's past, determined to ruin her credibility and force her out of Stella's life. His cruelty escalates, culminating in his assault on Blanche in scene 10, which is his ultimate assertion of dominance. He sees himself as a modern man reclaiming power, stating that he has pulled Stella down from them columns, destroying the southern aristocracy Blanche represents. So two quotes from him are, "I pulled you down off them columns," and this shows his beliefs that he has liberated Stella from Blanche's influence in the past. Also, "We've had this date with each other from the beginning." It's a sinister and predatory sort of comment to make, implying that Blanche's downfall was inevitable. Then we have Stella Kowalski. She's caught between the past, which is Blanche, and the present, which is Stanley. She's the bridge between two worlds, her refined southern upbringing and the raw modern world Stanley inhabits. She is torn between her sister's warnings about Stanley's brutality and her deep physical attraction to her husband. Unlike Blanche, who tries to escape reality, Stella chooses to accept it, even if it means turning a blind eye to Stanley's violence. She's submissive, but also pragmatic. She chooses Stanley over Blanche. Stella's dependence on Stanley is both emotional and financial, making it difficult for her to leave. Her famous line, "There are things that happen between a man and a woman in the dark that sort of make everything else seem unimportant," and it suggests that her relationship is based more on sexual passion than the emotional security. Ultimately, she rejects Blanche's version of events and chooses stability, even at the cost of betraying her sister. So one of her quotes is, "I couldn't believe her story and go on living with Stanley," and it highlights her deliberate self-deception, choosing to ignore Blanche's sexual assault rather than confront the reality. Also, "There are things that happen between a man and woman in the dark that sort of make everything else seem unimportant," and this suggests sexual attraction outweighs moral concerns in a relationship. Finally, we have Mitch. He's initially a romantic hope for Blanche, but ultimately rejects her. He represents a potential escape for Blanche, a man who, like Stanley, is gentler and more sensitive. He is portrayed as caring for his sick mother, making him seem compassionate. However, he is also deeply traditional and expects purity in women. His ultimate rejection of Blanche reflects society's double standards. He symbolizes how society judges and discards fallen women. At first, he sees Blanche as a refined and respectable woman, but once he learns about her past, he turns on her. His line, "You're not clean enough to bring home my mother," reinforces the theme that women's worth is tied to their sexual purity. Despite his earlier affection, he abandons Blanche in a time of need, showing weakness and hypocrisy. So that quote, "You're not clean enough to bring home to my mother," illustrates society's condemnation of women who do not conform to traditional expectations. Now we're going to go through dramatic methods. So there's 3 dramatic methods. The first one is expressionist elements. Blanche's hallucinations and the Vesuviana music equals psychological decay. Williams uses sound and vision to externalize Blanche's unraveling mental state. The Vesuviana polka plays whenever she recalls her young husband's suicide, becoming a haunting audio motif of guilt and trauma. In the final scene, she imagines hearing whispers and seeing shadows, making the audience experience her descent into madness. Then we have plastic theatre. Williams uses sound, lighting, and set design to show emotions. The play's realistic setting disrupted by exaggerated symbolic elements to reflect characters' emotions. Sound effects like street noise, train whistles, and echoes are heightened to emphasize tension and Blanche's increasing instability. The paper lantern is Blanche's fragile illusions. Blanche covers the bare light bulb with a paper lantern to soften the harsh reality of her surroundings, and when Mitch actually rips it off in scene 9, it symbolizes the shattering of her illusions and her exposure to the harsh truth. Finally, we have symbolism. Bathing is one of them. Blanche constantly bathes, trying to wash away her past. She uses long baths as a ritual of purification, but no amount of washing can cleanse her of her past mistakes. The more her secrets come to light, the more she bathes, showing her desperation to erase her sins. And then we have the polka game. It's a symbol of male dominance and power struggles. The polka game in scene 3 is a metaphor for power dynamics. Stanley wins, symbolizing his control over the household. And the game mirrors the power battle between Stanley and Blanche. She tries to challenge him, but he ultimately defeats her. So in conclusion, the play remains a powerful critique of gender roles, class conflict, and the consequences of repression, resonating with audience even decades after its debut. Williams masterfully explores how societal expectations, economic realities, and human desires collide, ultimately determining the fates of his characters. We've got gender roles. So the play exposes the rigid power structures in male-female relationships, particularly how women's autonomy is restricted in a world dominated by men. Blanche, Stella, and even Eunice are trapped within patriarchal expectations, forced to either submit or to suffer at the hands of men. And Stanley embodies toxic masculinity, using violence and control to assert his dominance, while Stella's choice to stay with him reflects the harsh realities of women faced in post-war America. Then we have class conflict. The struggle between old Southern aristocracy and New America plays out through Blanche and Stanley's power struggle. Blanche's refined manners and ideals are outdated, while Stanley's working class aggression and realism prevail, mirroring the shift in American society. Williams presents this conflict without idealization. Blanche is deeply flawed, but her world is being replaced by something cruder and more forgiving. And then we have the consequences of repression. The characters in A Streetcar Named Desire suffer because they repress or deny their true selves. Blanche hides from reality, but fantasies ultimately collapse, leading to her downfall. Stella represses her guilt to maintain her marriage, choosing to believe Stanley over her sister. Even Stanley, despite his confidence and dominance, is driven by a deep insecurity of class and power, leading him to crush anything that threatens his control. And finally, Blanche's tragic downfall forces us to ask, was she always doomed? Well, her fate raises questions about her personal responsibility versus societal constraints. Was her downfall inevitable, or could she have survived if the world had been more forgiving? Her tragic flaw, her inability to adapt to reality, certainly contributes to her demise, but so does a society that judges and discards women who do not conform. Her past actions, such as promiscuity, deception, and desperation, make her vulnerable, but ultimately the cruelty of others seals her fate. Another question is Stanley a villain or just a product of his world? Well, his actions, particularly the sexual assault in scene 10, are unquestionably brutal and predatory, making him easy to categorize as a villain. However, Williams does not portray him as a straightforward antagonist. He is also a man shaped by his environment, class, and cultural expectations. He represents the New World Order, where strength and dominance define success rather than gentility and manners of the past. While some may argue that he acts purely out of instinct and self-preservation, his calculated destruction of Blanche suggests something more sinister, a need to erase what he cannot control. So just a final thought, Blanche and Stanley are two forces in opposition, and in Williams's world, there is no room for both to exist. Her tragic fate is not just personal, it is a reflection of a society that punishes weakness, resists change, and allows cruelty to triumph over compassion. I really hope that this session has helped you guys. Please like and subscribe, and let me know if there's any other content that you wish to see in the near future. And stay tuned for more videos. Bye!